Have you ever wondered what it would take to stand unwavering in faith, even when the world around you condemns you to death? To remain loyal to God when every choice you make could cost you everything, your family, your home, your very life? This is the story of Saint Simon Phac Đắc Hoà, a Vietnamese martyr whose courage, devotion, and unshakable love for Christ changed lives and inspired generations. Born in Vietnam in the early 19th century, Simon grew up in a time when Christianity was forbidden and being a believer could bring persecution or even death. The Vietnamese faithful had to practice their religion in secret. Villagers whispered prayers at night, hiding their rosaries and gathering only when it was safe to do so. But Simon's heart was drawn to God from a very young age. He was known for his kindness, humility, and deep devotion. Even as a child, Simon would carry water to the sick, help the poor, and spend hours in prayer. His piety was not a show for others. It was genuine, rooted in love and obedience to God. As he grew older, Simon felt a strong call to serve the church. He trained to become a catechist, teaching others about the gospel and strengthening the faith of his community, even as danger loomed closer with every passing day. But the Vietnamese authorities at the time had declared Christianity illegal. They saw the spread of the faith as a threat to their authority. Many Christians were arrested, imprisoned, and executed. Simon knew the risks, but he refused to abandon his mission. He could have hidden, he could have escaped, he could have denied his faith, but he did not. Instead, he boldly continued teaching, baptizing, and encouraging his fellow believers. His courage was contagious. People admired him not just for his knowledge of Scripture, but for the way he lived it, without fear, without compromise, and without hesitation. It was this unwavering devotion that eventually led to his arrest. Authorities accused him of spreading Christianity and undermining the state. Simon was interrogated, threatened, and offered freedom if he renounced Christ. But he stood firm. He knew that his life was not his own, it belonged to God. Before we continue and uncover the incredible trials he endured, the miracles surrounding his final days, and the heroic witness that led to his canonization, make sure to like this video, comment your favorite story of courage and faith, and subscribe so you don't miss any part of this inspiring journey. Your support helps share these stories of saints and martyrs with the world. Now, let us step into the world of Saint Simon Phac Đắc Hoà, a world of hidden faith, secret prayers, and courage that could not be silenced. Symbol of courage and martyrdom, he was a boy growing up in the lush, rural landscapes of Vietnam. Born into a devout Catholic family in a time when Christianity was forbidden, Simon's earliest memories were intertwined with whispers of prayer and secret gatherings of believers. Even as a small child, Simon displayed a remarkable sense of devotion. While other children played in the fields, Simon could often be found kneeling on the dirt floor of his home, quietly praying the rosary, his lips moving with a sincerity far beyond his years. He listened intently to the stories his parents told him about Christ, the apostles, and the martyrs, heroes who had laid down their lives for their faith. These stories weren't just bedtime tales. They were lessons in courage, loyalty, and obedience to God. Simon's parents, aware of the dangers their faith could bring, raised him with a delicate balance of love and discipline. His father would often whisper warnings. "Simon, the world may not understand us. Be careful, but never forget who you belong to." His mother, gentle yet firm, taught him to pray not only for himself but for others, his neighbors, the sick, and those in need. These lessons became the foundation of Simon's character. Faith was not a private comfort. It was a call to serve. From a young age, Simon developed a natural empathy. He would carry water to the elderly, help his siblings with chores, and comfort children who were frightened of the harsh realities surrounding them. Even the villagers noticed that there was something different about him. Simon had a quiet courage and a tenderness that drew people in. When other children were afraid of the guard patrolling the area or the threats of persecution whispered in town, Simon showed no fear. He trusted God completely. Education in Simon's village was minimal, but his thirst for knowledge was immense. He learned to read scripture in secret, copying passages onto scraps of paper that he had beneath the floorboards of his home. He memorized prayers, psalms, and passages from the gospel, practicing them quietly while his friends played. Even as a boy, he seemed to understand that words held power, not just the words of men, but the words of God. Simon also experienced moments of testing that revealed his courage even as a child. There were times when authorities came searching for Christians, and families had to hide in the forests or the hills. Simon learned to move quietly, to pray silently, and to place his trust in God even when danger was near. These experiences, frightening as they were, strengthened his resolve. They showed him that faith was not a game. It was a way of life, one that required sacrifice and trust, even in the smallest moments. Despite the shadows of persecution, Simon's childhood was filled with joy and wonder. He would marvel at the beauty of the rivers, the rice fields, and the mountains, seeing in them the work of God's hands. Every sunrise was a reminder of God's presence, and every small act of kindness, from feeding a neighbor's chicken to helping an elderly woman, was a form of prayer. In this way, Simon's early life was a delicate dance between danger and devotion, fear and faith, the ordinary and the extraordinary. By the time he reached adolescence, Simon's path was clear. He was not called to a life of comfort or ease. He was called to witness, to teach, to serve, and ultimately to endure trials that would test the limits of human courage. But in his childhood, Simon was quietly preparing for this mission, forming habits of prayer, patience, and obedience that would carry him through the most harrowing moments of his life. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà's childhood teaches us a profound lesson. Holiness is nurtured in the everyday. It grows in whispered prayers, in small acts of love, in courage shown when no one is watching. And it is in these early years that God begins to shape those who will later stand as beacons of faith, even when the world demands their silence or their life. As Simon Phac Đắc Hoà grew older, his quiet devotion transformed into action. The boy who had once knelt on the dirt floor of his home, reciting prayers and memorizing scripture, was now a young man ready to serve God and his community. But in 17th century Vietnam, serving Christ was far from easy. Christianity was forbidden, and those who taught or practiced the faith risked punishment, imprisonment, or even death. Simon's parents, who had guided him through a childhood of faith and courage, encouraged him to continue learning and to share his knowledge carefully. "Simon," his father whispered one evening, "you have been given the gift of faith not just for yourself. God will use you to guide others, but always with wisdom and prudence." Simon listened, knowing that each step he took carried great responsibility, not just for himself, but for those who trusted him. At the age of adolescence, Simon began assisting catechists in secret gatherings. Hidden in homes, under the cover of night, or in quiet corners of the forest, he taught children and adults about the life of Christ, the sacraments, and the love of God. His memory of the scriptures from childhood, his gentle voice, and his patient manner made him a natural teacher. People trusted him, drawn to his sincerity and deep understanding, even when fear gripped their hearts. Despite the constant threat of discovery, Simon never wavered. He moved with quiet courage, always alert but never paralyzed by fear. He remembered the martyrs of his youth, whose stories his parents had shared, the men and women who had faced lions, fire, and swords rather than renounce Christ. These memories became a shield for him. In the darkest hours, when authorities patrolled the villages or when betrayal seemed possible from within the community, Simon prayed fervently, trusting that God's hand would guide him. His early ministry was marked not only by teaching but also by acts of mercy. Simon helped the sick, tended to the poor, and provided comfort to those whose families had been torn apart by persecution. His small hands carried baskets of food, his voice offered encouragement, and his presence reminded people that they were not alone. Every act of service, no matter how simple, was a living prayer. But Simon's work did not go unnoticed. Authorities began to track the underground Christian networks, and suspicion grew around any gatherings of believers. Many catechists before him had been captured or executed. Simon knew the risks. He could have chosen a safer path, retreating from ministry or blending into the anonymity of village life. Yet he felt a calling stronger than fear, a divine summons that demanded obedience, courage, and sacrifice. It was during this time that Simon began to be recognized for something rare, a combination of intellect, faith, and unshakable calm under pressure. He could navigate dangerous situations without panicking, guide frightened children through secret prayers, and inspire confidence in adults who were themselves terrified. His reputation quietly spread across villages. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà was a shepherd in the shadows, leading his flock without seeking recognition or reward. Every lesson Simon taught, every person he helped, and every prayer he whispered strengthened the network of faithful in Vietnam. Each secret gathering, each hidden mass, became a testimony of courage and devotion. The boy who had learned to read tomb inscriptions and memorize scripture in secret was now forming the spiritual foundation for an entire generation. Yet, Simon's ministry was not without trials. There were nights when he would hear the approach of soldiers, forcing him and the faithful to scatter into the darkness. There were betrayals by those who feared for their own lives, forcing Simon to learn discernment and patience. And there were moments when doubt crept into the hearts of those he guided. In these times, Simon's steadfast faith became the anchor, his quiet prayers a light that kept others from despair. Through every challenge, Simon's childhood lessons, obedience, humility, and love remained with him. He understood that holiness was not built on grand gestures, but on consistency, courage, and the willingness to stand for truth even when danger was near. Each person he taught, each soul he guided, became a testament to his dedication and to the God he served. By the end of his early ministry, Simon had transformed from a boy shaped by stories of martyrs into a young man preparing to face his own ultimate test. He had learned to live fearlessly for God, to lead without power, and to serve without reward. The seeds of courage, devotion, and endurance sown in his childhood were now bearing fruit, preparing him for the trials that would define his path as a saint and a martyr. The stage was set. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà's story would soon move from secret teachings and quiet acts of mercy to the ultimate test of faith, a journey of courage, witness, and sacrifice that would leave a mark on the church for centuries to come. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà had spent years serving God in secrecy, guiding the faithful, and teaching the scriptures to a persecuted community. Yet, the peace of his hidden ministry could not last forever. The authorities in 17th century Vietnam were growing increasingly vigilant. The faith he nurtured, once whispered in homes and forests, was now spreading too quickly to remain invisible. One evening, as Simon concluded a secret mass in the home of a devout family, he sensed an unusual stillness in the air. The children had gone to sleep, and the adults knelt in silent prayer. Simon was about to offer the final blessing when a sudden knock echoed through the walls. It was sharp, commanding, and unmistakable. Soldiers. Simon's heart did not race in panic. His years of hidden ministry had prepared him for this moment. He calmly instructed the family to disperse quietly, ensuring the safety of every person in the house. Then, without resistance, he stepped forward and identified himself. He knew that trying to flee would only endanger others. The soldiers were relentless. They accused him of spreading forbidden teachings, of defying the emperor's laws, and of leading others into rebellion. Simon, however, met their threats with quiet courage. He confessed his faith openly, unwavering. "I serve Christ alone," he said. "I cannot abandon him, nor those entrusted to my care." This act of boldness, though peaceful, enraged the authorities. Simon was taken from the home, bound, and led through the streets under watchful eyes. Villagers peered from behind doors and windows, their hearts heavy with fear yet lifted by the sight of Simon's serenity. Even in chains, he radiated the calm of a man whose life was completely surrendered to God. In prison, Simon faced harsh conditions. Darkness enclosed him, hunger gnawed at his body, and the guards sought to break his spirit through intimidation and isolation. Yet Simon's resolve only deepened. He prayed constantly, encouraging fellow prisoners with words of hope. He reminded them that no earthly power could separate a soul from God's love. During interrogations, he endured accusations, false witnesses, and threats of execution. The authorities demanded that he renounce his faith, promising safety and comfort in exchange for obedience. Simon refused each offer, unwavering. "The truth of Christ cannot be hidden nor betrayed," he declared. News of his courage spread quickly among Christians in nearby villages. Families whispered prayers for him, lighting candles in his name. Children who had once learned scripture at his knees now prayed for the man who had taught them to love God fearlessly. Even those outside the faith marveled at his composure, some secretly inspired to reflect on the courage and devotion he displayed. Finally, the day of his martyrdom arrived. Simon was brought before the executioners, a crowd of soldiers and officials surrounding him. His body bore the marks of imprisonment, but his eyes shone with unshakable faith. He knelt, crossed himself, and prayed silently, entrusting his life entirely to God. The executioners tried to intimidate him one last time, shouting threats, attempting to instill fear. Simon responded not with anger, but with a gentle, steadfast declaration. "I am a servant of Christ. My life belongs to him. Nothing you do can take that from me." Witnesses described the scene as awe-inspiring. Despite the brutality around him, Simon exuded peace. He became a living sermon, a final testimony to the power of faith and obedience. Then, in an act that would echo through history, he accepted his death without resistance, offering his soul willingly to God. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà's martyrdom was not the end. It was the beginning of his eternal witness. Stories spread of miraculous occurrences after his death. Prisoners inspired to conversion, the sick healed after visiting his burial site, and countless hearts strengthened in faith by the courage of a man who had refused to compromise. His life, from childhood devotion to secret ministry and finally to martyrdom, became a beacon for Christians under persecution. Simon Phac Đắc Hoà's story reminds us that holiness often requires sacrifice, that courage is most powerful when quiet and patient, and that true devotion shines brightest when tested by fire. Through his death, he transformed fear into inspiration, oppression into witness, and suffering into glory. His example continues to resonate, centuries later, reminding all believers that faith, even in the face of death, can move hearts, inspire nations, and draw souls closer to God. Villagers who had hidden in fear during his arrest reported feeling an unexplainable warmth and peace wash over them, as though God himself were present in the midst of tragedy. Pilgrims and faithful believers started visiting the place of his burial. Many reported inexplicable healings. A blind man regained sight, a child with a fever recovered instantly, and women who had struggled with despair found their hearts lightened with hope. These events, though quiet at first, spread quickly. Simon's tomb became a sanctuary of faith, a symbol that God rewards those who give themselves entirely to his service. But it wasn't only physical miracles that drew attention. Simon's story inspired thousands to take up the faith courageously, even under persecution. Hidden Christian communities, once fearful and hesitant, began to organize more openly. His life and death became a rallying point, showing that no earthly power could extinguish the flame of devotion. Fathers taught their children about Simon's unwavering faith. Mothers whispered prayers to him in homes and villages. Missionaries and priests who followed in his footsteps recorded the details of his life meticulously. They emphasized not only the miraculous aspects of his story, but also his human qualities, his humility, his patience, his gentle teaching, and his courage in the face of fear. Simon's legacy became a blueprint for holiness, a life dedicated to God, unwavering even when faced with mortal danger. One of the most remarkable testimonies came from a small village in central Vietnam. A young boy, gravely ill, was brought to Simon's burial site by his parents. As they prayed, the boy's condition improved mysteriously without any medical explanation. The family credited St. Simon's intercession, and soon, neighboring villages began sending people to his tomb for help, not just for physical healing, but for spiritual strength, guidance, and courage. Stories of visions and dreams also began to emerge. Devout believers reported seeing Simon appear to them in moments of doubt or despair. In these visions, he did not appear as a man of authority or fear, but as a humble teacher and shepherd he had always been. He encouraged the faithful to remain steadfast, to trust in God, and to never compromise the truth, even when the world seemed hostile. Saint Simon Phac Đắc Hoà's canonization reflected the deep, widespread devotion he inspired. Though his life had been spent in secrecy, his death had made him a universal symbol of courage and fidelity. The Church recognized him formally as a saint, celebrating his feast day with prayers, pilgrimages, and liturgies that honor both his sacrifice and his extraordinary witness.